Hi, this is Theo Watson, Government Contracts Attorney. Today we're going to cover a few brief points about participating in federal investigations. This presentation is primarily geared towards federal contractors, whether it's an individual, CEO, or some other target, also small businesses. Eventually, we're going to talk about 5 tips for individuals or government contractors involved in the federal investigation itself. How does the investigation start? Well, there's a series of events that can trigger federal investigation. First and foremost, you have the key time actions, which usually start with either an employee or subcontractor or some other third party that initiates either a complaint or files an actual case on behalf of the government, alleging that either your company has committed some type of criminal activity, and from that, the government usually starts the investigation process. Also, you have common actions, false claims action. These usually starts through either invoices, incorrect invoices, or some other method derived from what could be potential criminal activity. Medicare fraud, obviously, that happens through patients or even the agency itself initiated investigations based on attempts to defraud the federal government. That could be from the provider or the patient. You have the Small Business Administration, or SBA, or the contracting officer, who can initiate federal investigation based on evidence or actions seen from either the contractor or their employees. That's another means of starting a federal investigation. You can also have a situation where there's an ongoing federal investigation and one of the targets or people cooperating may provide information to the investigator that now triggers an investigation on a new target, which could be yourself individually or your company. Federal investigations, generally, agencies and law enforcement offices have a wide range of techniques that they can use to gather information. They can use wiretapping, actual surveillance, online activity, monitoring what you do on your computers, or they can even have other participants, which could be your employees or some other third party with a wire, and various other mechanisms. Obviously, there are things or issues that could be discussed, talking about right to privacy, etc., which drives obviously the agency getting warrants and so forth. Common question that comes up: should you cooperate with federal agents? Short answer is yes, but not without an attorney. There's a balance between the government having the right to investigate, protect its interests and taxpayers' dollars in the case of government contracts, and protecting your constitutional and statutory rights. But you need to be very careful about talking or speaking with federal investigators without counsel. A lot of things that you write or even say could be used against you. I'm sure most people know that. But usually when something has gone wrong without the attorney present, then it's hard to undo it. So always consider having legal counsel present or giving you advice. Don't want to talk to others about an investigation that includes family members, co-workers, friends, third parties, etc. Why? Because obviously they could also be working for the federal investigative agency, or at some point or another, they could be fair game to further investigative actions from the agency. As I mentioned before, understand that you have certain constitutional rights that limit government actions, and that's where having an attorney come on board is usually very effective. Disadvantage of government contractors. And again, as I said earlier, this presentation is mostly geared towards federal contractors, their employees, individuals involved in government contracting, but a lot of these points can also apply to healthcare industry, etc. When companies are under federal investigation for false claims or fraud under the SBA small business programs, a lot of the defendants will go and hire traditional defense attorney who may or may not, usually in most cases, they don't have the actual knowledge of the unique regulations required under government contracting and federal procurement. The result of that is that your cost for legal defense goes up because now the traditional defense attorney now has to get up to speed on the various rules, whereas the prosecution or the federal side, they have already using their enormous amounts of resources to already put the case in motion. So you're kind of playing from behind. Traditionally, a lot of the small businesses that's being targeted in government investigations are usually, the focus is usually on a few topics that seem to surface quite a bit. Limitations on subcontracting rules that could be translated into pass-through contracts. Having a criminal defense attorney that understands these particular rules is usually helpful when you're trying to assert your defense against any allegations of criminal activity. SBA affiliation and control rules. That's usually common when you have allegations of violation of SBA small business rules. These are usually topics that usually come up as the substance of the prosecution's case. Also, common in government contracting is relationships with teaming and joint ventures. That's usually where most problems usually occur, and federal investigations would usually be focused on the relationships, which will then drive the criminal allegations. Federal prosecutors usually allege violations of SBA and federal small business regulations, but do not always prove the critical aspects of their case. Why is that? That's not because they don't know. Sometimes the criminal defense attorney is not usually privy or even aware of what these important rules say, which would actually put your defense in jeopardy. What are your options? Not all federal criminal cases are strong for the prosecution. As we mentioned before, find a criminal defense attorney that also understands the substantive procurement law or whatever type of law that you're being charged under. If you're at the initial stages of the federal investigation, be extremely careful how you respond to government subpoena and requests for information. Again, you want to seek help from counsel because a lot of rights are at stake here, and sometimes when those rights have been tampered with and you don't have protection, you could have been arguably waived those rights. So you want to be careful there. Never offer to speak to a federal investigator without assistance from legal counsel. Can't stress that part enough for obvious reasons. For federal contractors, never hire a criminal attorney that has no experience in federal procurement law. Again, talked about that previously, but wanted to really emphasize the importance, because once the case gets too far, it's really hard procedurally and substantively to play from behind, and there's plenty of cases where defendants have either have to spend jail time, significant fees, or both. So you really want to pay attention up front and develop a strong position up front in your case. Tips for success, some basic housekeeping things: keep records of business operations and letters to third parties. They can prove pretty helpful when you're under a federal investigation, whether it's for intent purposes or otherwise. Develop internal policies and controls for your companies. A lot of small businesses, especially, they perform government contract without self-governance. A lot of times when you're under an investigation and you show that you have the policies and controls in place for your companies. Those could be mitigating circumstances that could either help negotiate deals and punishment, etc. Along with that, like I said, conduct internal audits and investigations on a frequent basis. Again, that leads towards mitigating either fines or fees or lack of intent if they apply to the charges being brought. If you're a small business, you want to make sure that you understand the various procurement rules. A lot of small businesses get into the government contracts, and when the investigation occurs, they may either try to show that they weren't familiar with the rules, which generally is not a defense. So now you put yourself in a precarious position. You want to be able to understand up front when those contracts are awarded that you understand the rules and so forth, so that you minimize the probability of getting charged with criminal activity. Understand that the feds target small businesses mostly for SBA regulation violations, and then after that has been proven, then feds add conspiracy and wire fraud charges to the case, and that focuses on substantial amount of jail time, fees, or both. All of the above and more can develop a path for avoiding the most costly mistakes in federal criminal cases or when you're doing business with the federal government. That's it in a nutshell. If you want help from attorneys that understand both the criminal law and government contracting aspects of your case, feel free to give us a call at Watson & Associates. Telephone number is 1-866-601-5518 toll-free. And typically for large cases and high-profile cases, we have access to external resources that include former federal prosecutors and attorneys. So feel free to give us a call and talk to us about how we can further help. Thanks.